Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. Uh, Before Mr. James comes in, we shall commence with puja. I shall now request Mr. N.G. Krishnan at the shrine of Raman Kendra Delhi to initiate. Sir.
ध्रुवन्त इन्द्रश्चाग्निश्च राष्ट्रं धारयतां ध्रुवं देवीं वाजमणयन्त देवाः तां विश्वरूपा पशवो दन्ते सानो मन्दिरे मूर्त्यन्दुहानां देवीर्वारश्मासु स्वस्तितैः पर्वदैवा विशालिः इन्द्रैवेहवत्वष्टः इह राष्ट्रमुदारय अभिदिष्टमर्त्यन्यतः अदरे सन्तु शद्रवः इन्द्र इव वृत्रः दष्टः सुमुहूर्तोऽस्तु सुप्रीतमस्तु यद्यास्महव्ये नमसो वसत्य मित्रं देवं मित्रदेयन्नोऽस्तु अनुराधान् महिजा वर्धयन्तः शरञ्जीवेन शरदस्य वीराः दीर्घायुष्यमस्तु आगमास्तु देवानां मनास्तु रक्षसां कण्ठारवं गणिं यादो देवदा वनकारणम् ॐ कलशस्य मुखे विष्णुः कण्ठे रुद्रसमासिता मूले तत्रस्थितो ब्रह्मा मध्ये मातृगणा सदा कुक्षे दूसागरा सर्वे सप्तद्वीपा वसुन्धरा ऋग्वेदोदयजुर्वेदः सामवेद अथर्वणः अङ्गैश्च सगिधा सर्वे कलशाम्बूसमासिता अङ्गे चैमुने चैव गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे कावेरी जलेऽस्मिन् सन्निधिं कुरु आयान्तु देवपूजार्थं दुरिदक्षयकारका पूजाकरणानि प्रोक्ष्य आत्मानं च प्रोक्ष्य आब्रह्मलोकात् आशेषात् आलोकात् लोकपर्वतात् निवसन्ति विजादेवा तेभ्यो नित्यं नमो नमः। शिवन्नं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्याये सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये ॐ भुवः ॐ शिवः ॐ महः ॐ जनः ॐ तपः ॐ सत्यं ॐ सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि यो यो नः चोदयात् ॐ आपः ज्योतिषः अमृतं ब्रह्म भूर्भुवस्वरो मोपात्तसमस्त वृदक्षयद्वारा श्रीपरमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थं तदेव लग्नं सुदिनं तदेव आराबनं स्मीपतेः अङ्गुलीगं वरामि करिष्यमाणस्य कर्मणः निर्विघ्नेन परिसमाप्त्यर्थम् आदौ श्रीमहागणपतिपूजां करिष्ये अभौपस्पृश्य गणानां त्वा गणपतिम् अवामहे कवीनां भवश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पदानः शृण्वन् ऊदिभिः सीदसाधनम् अस्मिन् हरिद्राबिम्बे सुमुखं महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि। हे महागणपते नमः। आसनार्थं श्रद्धान् समर्पयामि। पादयोः पाद्यं समर्पयामि। अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि। आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। मधुभर्गं समर्पयामि। स्नापयामि। आपोहिष्टामि योगोस्थानपूज्येदराचन मधेरणाय चक्षुषे योगशिवदमोरधः स्य भार्ये देहनः सदीरिव मातरः स्मारङ्गमामवो यशिक्षयाय जन्मदा पापो जनयता जनः उद्भवस्सुवो भूर्भुवस्वः अनानन्तरम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। वस्त्रोत्तरीयं श्रद्धान् समर्पयामि। भवीयं समर्पयामि। दिव्यपरिमल गन्धान् धारयामि। हरिद्रा कुङ्कुमचूर्णं समर्पयामि। शोभन अक्षतान् समर्पयामि। पुष्पमालान् समर्पयामि। पुष्पैः पूजयामि। ओम सुमुखाय नमः। ओम एकदन्ताय नमः। ओम कपिलाय नमः। ओम गजगन्नकाय नमः। लंबोदराय नमः। ओम विकटाय नमः। ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः। ओम गणाधिपाय नमः। ओम धूमकेतवे नमः। ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः। ओम बालचन्द्राय नमः। ओम गजाननाय नमः। ओम वक्रतुण्डाय नमः। ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः। ओम केरम्बाय नमः। स्कन्दपूर्वजाय नमः। ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः। ओम गणपतये नमः। ओम हेरम्बाय नमः। ओम धरणीधराय नमः। ओम महागणपतये नमः। ओम लक्ष्यप्रदाय नमः। ओम प्रसादराय नमः। क्षिप्रप्रसादराय नमः। ओम अमोघसिद्धये नमः। ओम अमृताय नमः। ओम इंद्राय नमः। ओम चिंतामणये नमः। ओम हृदये नमः। ओम सुमंगलाय नमः। ओम बीजाय नमः। ओम आचापूरकाय नमः। ओम वरदाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम काश्यपाय नमः। ओम नंदनाय नमः। ओम वाचासिद्धाय नमः। ओम दुंडी विनदाय नमः। नानाविध परिमल पत्रपुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। ओम दीपदीपार्थं अक्षतान् समर्पयामि। ओम धूपदीपार्थम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। समस्त उपचार पूजान् समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ओमापः ज्योतिषः अमृतं ब्रह्म भूर्भुवस्सुवरोम्। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम वाणाय स्वाहा। ओम ध्यानाय स्वाहा। ओम दानाय स्वाहा। ओम मानाय स्वाहा। ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। मधोऽभिधानसि ब्रह्मवदो मधोवत्तरणमसि। वेदान्तरम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। तत्पुरुषाय विद्महे वक्रतुण्डाय धीमहि तन्नो दन्ति प्रचोदयात्। ओम महागणपतये नमः। कर्पूरनीराजनं सन्दर्शयामि। नीराजनम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि। ओम नमो पुराणपतये नमो गणपतये नमः प्रमोदपतये नमस्ते अस्तु लंबोदराय एकदन्ताय विघ्नविनाशिने शिवसुराय श्रीवरद मूर्तये नमो नमः। ओम रुद्रपुष्पं समर्पयामि। वर्णपुष्पं समर्पयामि। समस्त उपचारपूजान् समर्पयामि। वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभा अविघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येहि सर्वदा। शुभमुपस्पृश्य ओम विघ्नेश्वराय नमः। ओम शोभनार्थे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च ओम यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। वनार्थे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च ओम क्लाम्भरधरं विष्णुं शिवन्नं सदर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नवशान्तये। भुवः ओं सुवः महः ओं जरः ओं तपः ओं सत्यम् ओं सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ओमापः ज्योतिषः अमृतं ब्रह्म भूर्भुवस्सुवरोम्। ममोपाक्त समस्त वृद्धक्षयद्वारा श्रीपरमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थं शुभे शोभने मुहूर्ते अद्य ब्रह्मणः द्वितीयवराब्धे श्वेतवराहकल्पे वैवस्वतमन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरोः दक्षिणे पार्श्वे शकाब्धे स्मिन् तमाने प्रभवादि षष्टि संवत्सराणां मध्ये विन्ध्यस्य उत्तरे आर्यावर्त एकदेशे इन्द्रप्रस्थ महाक्षेत्रे कुरुक्षेत्रे दक्षिणवाहिन्याः यमुनायाः पश्चिमे तीरे विक्रमशक बौद्ध अवतारे बार्हस्पत्यमानेन प्रमादीनां षष्ट्याः संवत्सराणां मध्ये पिङ्गलनाम संवत्सरे सौरचान्द्रमानाभ्यां शोभकृतिनाम संवत्सरे उत्तरायणे हेमन्तर्दो मकरमासे प्रभक्षे तृतीयायां भानुवासरयुक्तायां नक्षत्रयुक्तायां योगविष्णुकर्ण एवं गुणविशेषण षष्ठायामस्यां तमानायां पुण्यदो परमेश्वरप्रीत्यर्थं योगशुभकर्ण सकलविशेषणविशिष्टायां श्यां शुभदो अमोपाक्तमस्त ऋतक्षयद्वारा परमेश्वरप्रीत्यर्थम् अस्माकं सहकुटुम्बानां क्षेमस्थैर्य धैर्यविजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणां विभृतं समस्त दुर्लोभशान्त्यर्थं यावच्छक्ति ध्यानावनादि षोडश पूजां करिष्ये। विशेषतः श्री रमणमहर्षिभ्यां अष्टोत्तर शतनामावली जपम् एव अक्षरमणिमाला पारायणं च अद्य करिष्ये। अपार सच्चित् सुखभारिराशेत् यस्मोर्मिमात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुहाविदं तं भ्रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविहीनं श्रीचिन्तयामि। ॐ महासेन महासेन जाताय नमः। ॐ श्रीरमणाय नमः। ॐ श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ अखण्ड संहिताकाराय नमः। ॐ महोजवसे नमः। ॐ कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ॐ जगद्धितावधाराय नमः। ॐ भूमिनाथ रोद्धिदाय नमः। ॐ पराशर गुणोत्तंसाय नमः। ॐ कुन्दराटबबलाय नमः। ॐ गमनीय चारित्राय नमः। ॐ सहायाम्बा सहायवते नमः। ॐ सोणाचलमहोलीनमानसाय नमः। ॐ स्वर्णहस्ताय नमः। श्रीमद्वादशान्त महास्थले लब्धविद्योदयाय नमः। ॐ महाशक्ति विवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ॐ परमार्थविदे नमः। ॐ दीविराय नमः। ॐ पितृफलान्वेषिणे नमः। ॐ ऐन्द्रिमौलिना पितृमते नमः। ॐ पितृलोचेद शोणशैल प्राप्ताय नमः। ॐ तपोमयाय नमः। ॐ दासीनाय नमः। ॐ महायोगिने नमः। ॐ महोत्साहाय नमः। ॐ कुशाकृतये नमः। ॐ शान्तसङ्कल्पसंरम्भाय नमः। ॐ सुसदृशे नमः। ॐ सवित्रे नमः। ॐ शीघ्राय नमः। ॐ तपक्षुविजसर्वाङ्गाय नमः। ॐ पुल्लाम्बुज विलोचनाय नमः। ॐ चन्द्रिकासहास श्रीमण्डलान मण्डलाय नमः। ॐ शूलवाड्या समासीनाय नमः। ॐ शूर्णलागिल विभ्रमाय नमः। ॐ वेदवेदान्त तद्वज्ञाय नमः। ॐ चिन्मुद्रिणे नमः। ॐ त्रिगुणादिगाय नमः। ॐ विरूपाक्षगुहावासाय नमः। ॐ जातलाकृतये नमः। उद्दीप्तनयनाय नमः। ॐ पूर्णाय नमः। ॐ ऋषिदाचलताण्डवाय नमः। ॐ गम्भीराय नमः। ॐ परमाचार्याय नमः। ॐ सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ॐ अभयप्रदाय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणास्यनिवाय नमः। ॐ धीराय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणभिमुखाय नमः। ॐ स्वराजे नमः। ॐ मकर्षये नमः। ॐ भगवते नमः। ॐ ईड्याय नमः। ॐ भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः। ॐ विमलाय नमः। ॐ दीर्घदर्शिने नमः। ॐ आप्ताय नमः। ॐ ऋजुमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः। ॐ समदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्यदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्याय नमः। ॐ प्रशान्ताय नमः। ॐ अमितविक्रमाय नमः। ॐ सुकुमाराय नमः। ॐ सदानन्दाय नमः। ॐ मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ॐ दयानवाय नमः। ॐ सोनाशलहृद्भूत स्कन्दाश्रमनिकेतनाय नमः। ॐ ॐ सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टे नमः ॐ सद्भक्तवृन्दपरिवृताय नमः गणेश मुनिभृङ्गेन शैविदाम्बरीशरोरुहाय नमः ॐ गीतोपदेश सारादि प्रसन्नसंशयाय नमः ॐ वर्णाश्रम पदातीताय नमः ॐ ऋषज्ञाय नमः सोम सौम्याय नमः ॐ आत्मपदे नमः ॐ सर्वानिमस्तानाम् आराध्याय नमः ॐ सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः ॐ आत्मारामाय नमः ॐ महाभागाय नमः ॐ मातृमुक्तिविनायकाय नमः ॐ विनदाय नमः ॐ विनुदाय नमः ॐ विप्राय नमः ॐ मुनीन्द्राय नमः ॐ भावगोज्ज्वलाय नमः ॐ दर्शनादकसंहारिणे नमः ॐ मौनस्वात्मबोधकाय नमः ॐ शान्तिकरसान्निध्याय नमः ॐ स्वर्णाद्बन्धमोचकाय नमः अन्धस्तिमिरचण्डांशवे नमः ॐ संसारनवाधारकाय नमः ॐ सौनाब्धिशक्तिदृष्टे नमः ॐ अर्धविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः ॐ अविच्युतनिजप्रज्ञाय नमः ॐ नैसर्गिकमातपसे नमः ॐ कमण्डलधराय नमः सुप्रगौबीनवसनाय नमः ॐ गुहाय नमः ॐ दण्डबाणये नमः ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः ॐ भवरोगविषग्वराय नमः ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः ॐ देवदमाय नमः ॐ मर्त्याय नमः ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः. You are now going to recite Upadesa Undiyar. कर्तुराज्ञया प्राप्यते बलं कर्म किं परं कर्म तज्जडं हृदिमहोददौ पतनकारणं बलमशाश्वतं गतिनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं चित्तचोदकं मुक्तिसाधकम् कायवाङ्मनः कार्यमुत्तमं पूजनं जप चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगत ईशदी युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृदेवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवात् उच्चमन्दतः चित्तजं जप ध्यानमुत्तमम् आज्यधारया स्रोतसा समम् सरलचिन्तनं विरलदः परम् भेदभावना अमित्यसौ भावनाभिता भावनीमता भावशून्यसत् भावसुस्थितिः भावनाबलात् भक्तिरुत्तमा हृत्स्थले मनः स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगभोगाश्च निश्चितम् आयुरोदना दीयते मनः झालपक्षिव रोदसाधनम् चित्तवायवा चित्क्रियायुता शाकयोद्वयी शक्तिमूलका लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयगदम्बुन भवति नो मृदम् प्राणबन्धना लीलमानसम् एकचिन्तना नाशमेद्यतः अष्टमानसोत्कृष्टयोगिनः कृत्यमस्तिगिं स्वस्तितं यतः दृश्यवारिदं चित्तमात्मनः चित्पदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं किं मार्गनिगृहे नैव मानसं मार्ग आर्जवात् वृत्यः स्वहं वृत्तिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मनः विबुधो भवति चिन्वतः ऐबदत्यहम् निजविचारणम् अहमिनाजबा अहमहं तया पुरतिहृत्स्वयं परमपूर्णसत् इदमहं वदा अभिज्ञमन्वहम् अहमिलनगे व्यलय सद्दया विग्रहेन्द्रियः प्राणजीतमः नागमेघस तज्जडं व्यसत् अद्ववासिगः चित्तवेतरा सद्दया हि चित्तया वयम् ईशजीवयो वेषजीविता सत्स्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् वेषहानतः स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपतः आत्मसंस्थितिः स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भय आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनचे ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरं किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भव अपूर्णचित्सुखं बन्धमुख्यदी परं सुखं विन्दतीगजी वस्तुदैविकः अहमवेदकं निजविभानकं महतिदं तपो रमणवागीयम् अहमवेदकं निजविभानकं महतिदं तपो रमणवागीयम्.
Namo Ramana. A warm welcome to all the devotees. Sorry, I'll just replace. Yes, this is better. Thank you. A warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. He shall be speaking to us on Anmavidai, a topic that he has been addressing for the last few months. Since there are a few people on YouTube that I see who are new, I shall quickly introduce Mr. James. He had started his spiritual journey at Tiruvannamalai during his visit to India in 1976, where he stayed for over 20 years. Mr. James had a long friendship and association with Sri Sadhu Om and assisted him in translating Guru Vachaka Kovai, Nanyar, Ulladu, Narpadu, and other works of Bhagwan into English. Mr. Michael James is now based in London, where he regularly discusses Bhagwan's teachings with fellow devotees via email and Zoom. He addresses devotees of Raman Kendra Delhi every second Sunday of the month. Sir, over to you. Sir, we are not able to hear you.
Oh, can you hear now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachalaramana. Namaskaram. Last time I began to discuss the meaning of verse 4 of Anmavidai, and I'll continue this time. What Bhagavan says in verse 4 is, for the bonds beginning with karma to be untied, to rise above the devastation beginning with birth, more than whatever path, this path is exceedingly easy. This path obviously refers to the path of Abhavichara. And then he goes on to say, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, in the heart, the light of oneself alone, that implies the light of oneself alone will shine forth. This is the eternal experience. Fear does not exist, the ocean of bliss alone. So that's the meaning of the verse. I was beginning to discuss the meaning of the first sentence. For the bonds beginning with action to be untied, to rise from devastation beginning with birth, more than whatever path, this path is exceedingly easy. I had discussed the first clause, for the bonds beginning with karma to be untied. And so now I'll proceed to discuss the second clause. In the second clause of this first sentence, Bhagavan says, Janmadi Nattam era, to rise from a devastation beginning with birth, in which Janmadi, beginning with birth, implies everything entailed in embodied existence or samsara, the continuous cycle of birth and death. And Nattam, Nattam is, it means loss, damage, injury, ruin, destruction, or devastation. Nattam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word nashta, which in this context is an adjective that means lost, disappeared, dead, perished, destroyed, spoilt, damaged, corrupted. And it can also, in this context, it can be an adjective or it can be a noun. In this context, it's a noun, which means loss, disappearance, destruction, devastation, deterioration, or corruption. Therefore, Jamadi Nattam implies the devastating and miserable state of samsara, in which we have seemingly lost the infinite happiness that is our real nature by rising as ego, the corrupted awareness, I am this body. And era means, which literally means to rise or ascend, can also mean to awaken, revive, be resuscitated, or return to life. So it implies to rise up or extricate oneself from a devastating state of samsara, which we can do only by waking up to our own real nature, swarupa. Kanmadi Katu, the bonds beginning with karma, and Jemmadi Nattam, the devastation beginning with birth, are intimately related, because karma and birth are both fundamental features of samsara, and each entails the other, because the fruits of karma give rise to repeated births and deaths. And by being born, we continue to ensnare ourselves in doing karma and experiencing its fruit. The root cause of both the bonds beginning with karma and the devastation beginning with birth is ego. Because so long as we rise and stand as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we seem to be born and to die. And in this state of embodied existence, we seem to be the doer of karma and the experiencer of its fruit. We can know what we actually are just by being as we actually are, without rising as ego to do even the slightest action of mind, speech, or body. That's what Bhagavan implies in the main clause. Therefore, the reason why self-investigation is the easiest means to untie ourselves from the bonds beginning with karma are equally well the reasons why it's the easiest means for us to rise from the devastation beginning with birth. I have already explained in some of these reasons last time, but another reason is implied by Bhagavan in the second sentence of this verse. Sammana tanuvin kanmadi siridindri summa amandiraka amma ahatil anma jyotiye. That means when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, are in the heart the light of oneself alone. That's all he said, but the implied verb is alone will remain, existing and shining as I am. self-investigation is the easiest means for us to untie the bonds beginning with karma and to rise from the devastation beginning with birth, not only because it is the only means by which we can do so, but also because it is in itself much easier than any other spiritual practice, since it does not entail any doing or action, karma, but is the state of just being as we always actually are, without rising as ego to do anything at all. That is, we can investigate and know what we actually are only by being what we actually are, because what we actually are is pure awareness, which always knows itself just by being itself, and which never does anything whatsoever. As pure awareness, we never know anything other than ourself, I am. So what knows anything other than ourself is only ourself as ego. So long as we know anything other than ourself, therefore, we have risen and are standing as ego, and hence we can remain as pure awareness only by being so keenly self-attentive that we thereby cease being aware of anything other than ourself. Knowing or being aware of anything other than ourself is an action, because it entails a movement of our mind or attention away from ourself towards that other thing. Whereas knowing ourself is not an action, but just being, because it does not entail even the slightest movement of our attention away from ourself, as Bhagavan implies in verse 26 of Upadesa Undiyar. What he says in that verse is, Tanai iritle, tanai aritalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Tani rendatradal. That means because oneself is devoid of two. That is, there are no two selves, one self to know the other self. So we know ourselves just by being ourselves. Tanmaya nishte idu. This is Tanmaya nishta. Tanmaya nishta means Tanmaya means Tatmaya. Tat means Brahman. So Tanmaya nishta means being firmly fixed or established as that, for one infinite reality called Brahman. What he describes here as Tanai Iritale, being as oneself or being oneself, is what he describes in more detail in the second sentence of verse 4 of Anmavide as Solmana Tanuvin Kanmadi Siridindri Summa Amandu Iratal. Just being, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body. Iraka is the infinitive of the verb iru, which means exist, be, or remain. So in this context, it means when one is or when one remains, because in Tamil, the infinitive is often used idiomatically to express a condition in the sense of when. Therefore, Solmana Tanuvin Kamadi Siridindri Summa Amandirka, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, is a conditional clause in which the main verb, iraka, when one is qualified by three adverbials, namely solmana tanuvin kamadi siridindri, without the least action of mind, speech, or body, summa, just, and amandu, resting. Of these three adverbials, perhaps the most significant is summa, which is an adverb that means just, merely, quietly, silently, calmly, peacefully, restfully, leisurely, without rising and without doing. Summa irital, or summa iripadu, therefore means just being, in the sense of calmly and silently being without doing anything at all. So it implies just being as we actually are, without rising as ego, even to the slightest extent, as Bhagavan makes clear in the following portion of the 6th paragraph of Nana. That is, the 6th paragraph is a long paragraph, but in one portion of the paragraph he says, Manate Balibidamal Hridiyatil Vetu Kondirupadu Kutan Ahamukum Aladu Antamukum Endrupaya. that means the name Ahamukam, Ahamukam means facing inside or facing I, or Antamukam, facing inside, is only for, or refers only to, keeping the mind in the heart. What Bhagavan means here by keeping the mind in the heart is keeping one's mind or attention fixed firmly on the fundamental awareness I am, which is the core or heart of ego, the adjunct conflated awareness I am this body. And then he goes on to say, without letting it go out. That means implies without letting it go out towards anything else. So ahamukam or antamukam means keeping the mind fixed firmly in the heart without letting it go out towards anything else. It's the implication. The name Bahirmukam, then he goes on to say, Hridiya Tilirandu, Veli Vidu Vadaku Tan Bahirmukam Endrupaya. The name Bahirmukam, facing outside, is only for letting the mind go out from the heart. And that is letting the mind go, move outwards, away from I am towards anything else, is the implication. And then he goes on to say, Ividamaha manam hridiyatil tangave ella ninevagalakum mulamana nan embadu poi epodum ulla tan matram vilangam. That means only when the mind remains firmly fixed in the heart in this way will what is called I, namely ego, which is the moolam, the root or foundation or cause or origin for all thoughts, depart, and oneself, who always shines, who always exists, alone will shine. And then he goes on to say, Tan matram belangam, oneself alone will shine. Nan enum nenevu kinjitum ila idame swarupamahum. That literally means only the place where the thought called I does not exist, even a little, is swarupa. The thought called I refers to ego. The place where, though Bhagavan says what he says, idam literally means place, he uses the word place metaphorically. So it means only that, it implies only that state, or only that state in which there's not even the slightest trace of this thought called I. In other words, the state in which ego doesn't rise even to the slightest extent, that alone is Swarupa, our own real nature. And then he goes on to say, Aduve monam enapadam. That alone is called the heart. That alone is called mona, silence. And then he says, Ivaru summa irupadukutan jnana drishti endrupaya. That means the name Atma Drishti is only for just being in this way. The word he uses for just being is summa irupadu. And then he says, then he describes what he means by summa irupadu. Summa irupadavadu, that is, what is summa irupadu? Manate atma swarupatil leika sevade, is what is just being is making the mind to subside or to dissolve in Atmaswarupa, in our own real nature. So that state in which the mind or ego dissolves back into its source and remains as it actually is, as Atmaswarupa, dissolves in Atmaswarupa as Atmaswarupa, that alone is the state of just being. What he implies here is that summa irupadu, just being, is the state in which ego has dissolved completely and forever in Atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa refers to ourself as we actually are, without leaving even the slightest trace. And we can achieve this permanent dissolution or eradication of ego only by keeping our mind or attention fixed firmly in the heart, namely our fundamental awareness, I am, which is the very core or center of ourself, by means of ahamokam, which means facing inside or facing I, and therefore implies being keenly self-attentive. That is, this term ahamokam, this is a term Bhagavan often uses. For example, in the Tamil version of verse 3 of Arunachala Pancharatnam, he begins with ahamokama, amalamati, that pure mind which is ahamokam. Ahamokam, Bhagavan often uses this term in Tamil in place of the more usual Sanskrit term antamukam. Antamukam simply means facing inside. But ahamukam in Tamil has a double meaning, because aham is both the Sanskrit first person pronoun, I. It is also a separate word in Tamil, a word of Tamil origin, but means home, heart, or what is inside. So ahamukam means both facing inside and facing towards I. What is inside is only I. So the two meanings actually amount to the same thing, but Bhagavan used, I think this was a favorite term of Bhagavan because it has this double meaning, but the two meanings are both pointing at the same thing. So it clarifies that what is meant by antamukam, facing inwards, is only facing towards I. That is, for the purposes of Atma Vichara, everything other than I is bahir, is external. What is internal, what is inside, is only I. So ahamukam means facing I. In other words, facing ourself alone, attending to ourself alone. Then another adverbial which he uses here is a mandu, which is an adverbial participle, which in this context implies much the same as summa, because it means resting, reposing, abiding, remaining, settling, or becoming still or tranquil. So summa amandu iratal, just being resting, or being just resting, it means that, and implies calmly, quietly, and peacefully being as we actually are, without rising as ego to do anything at all. The implication of these two adverbials, summa and amandu, is further emphasized by the adverbial clause that precedes them, namely solmanada tanuvin kanmadi siridindri, without the least action or karma of mind, speech, or body. So solmana tanuvin kamadi siridindri summa amandiratal, just being, resting without the least action of mind, speech, and body, is a more elaborate description of summa irabdu, the state of just being as we actually are by not rising as ego. That is, so long as we rise as ego, we seem to be something other than what we actually are. So in order to be as we actually are, that means we have to just cease rising as ego. So long as we rise and stand as ego, we experience these three instruments of action, namely the mind, speech, and body, as if they were ourself. So whatever actions these instruments may do are experienced by us as actions done by ourself. When the mind is thinking, our experience is, I am thinking. When the tongue is speaking, our experience is, I am speaking. When the body is doing any action, I am doing this action, because we identify with these instruments of action. Therefore, in order to be without the least action of mind, speech, or body most effectively, completely, and permanently, we need to cease rising as ego. And we will cease rising as ego only to the extent to which we hold fast to being self-attentive. That is, it is the nature of the mind, speech, and body to be active. If it's possible, if we want to remain without action of speech, we can remain without saying anything, but we can't remain without actions of the body. The body is always there's always actions going on in the body. Likewise, the mind. The nature of the mind is to be active. Whenever we rise as ego, the mind is active. So, in order to be without the least action of mind, speech, or body implies to be without rising as ego. If we don't rise as ego, whatever actions of mind, speech, or body may be doing has no connection with us because we don't identify ourselves with the mind, speech, or body. But as soon as we rise as ego, we identify ourselves with mind, speech, or body, and therefore we are engaged in action of mind, speech, and body. So in order to avoid rising as ego, what we need to do is to hold fast to self-attentiveness. So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding and nourishing ego, the false identification, I am this body. But to the extent to which we are self-attentive, ego thereby subsides and we remain free of that identification. That is what is implied here. What, but another point that's important to understand is what Bhagavan implies when he talks about just being, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body. He is not referring to manolaya, which is a temporary dissolution of mind, but only manonasa, annihilation of mind. Whenever we allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else whatsoever, that movement is a mental activity. And mental activities give rise to activities of speech and body. Therefore, we can avoid being entangled in any kind of action or karma only to the extent to which we do not allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else. However, though not allowing it to move towards anything else is necessary, it is not sufficient because, as I explained earlier, merely ceasing to attend to anything else without attending to ourselves would result in manolaya. Manolaya means temporary dissolution of mind, which is a state of being without the least action of mind, speech, and body, but not the eternally action-free state of being that Bhagavan implies in this verse. Sleep is a state of manolaya. So since the mind is absent of sleep, it is a state in which we remain without the least action of mind, speech, or body. But we cannot eradicate ego merely by remaining in sleep or in any other state of samadhi, of manolaya, such as swoon, coma, general anesthesia, or kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, because in such states, ego has already subsided and dissolved back into its source, albeit only temporarily, so in its absence it cannot be annihilated. To illustrate this, Bhagavan used to tell a story of a yogi who lived on the banks of the Ganga and who was adept at immersing himself in kevala nirvikalpa samadhi by means of pranayama and other yoga practices. One day when he woke up from samadhi, he felt thirsty. So he asked his disciple to fetch a cup of water from the river. But before his disciple returned, he again immersed himself in samadhi. And this time he immersed himself so deeply that he did not wake up for 300 years. When he finally woke up, he asked angrily, "Where's my water?" Not knowing that his disciple had passed away hundreds of years earlier and that the river had changed its course and was now several miles away. As Bhagavan pointed out, what this story illustrates is that even the most superficial thought in the mind, in this case the desire for water, which was the last thought in his mind before he subsided in samadhi, and the first thought that appeared when he woke up from it, is not destroyed, no matter how long one may remain in kevala nirvikalpa samadhi or any other state of laya. So when even such a superficial thought is not destroyed, that indicates that the inclinations, vasanas, that give rise to thoughts are likewise not destroyed or weakened even to the slightest extent in such a state. The seeds from which all thoughts or mental activities, vrittis, sprout are Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas means inclinations, vasanas, to attend to or experience objects or phenomena, Vishayas. So thoughts will not cease permanently until all Vishaya vasanas are destroyed. The root of all vasanas is ego, because they are ego's inclinations. And since it is the nature of ego to have Vishaya vasanas, they cannot be destroyed entirely until ego itself is eradicated. However, in order to eradicate ego, it is necessary for us to weaken our Vishaya vasanas to a considerable extent, because so long as they are strong, we will not be willing to be so keenly self-attentive, but we subside completely and lose ourselves forever in our source and substance, namely our fundamental awareness, I am. Since Vishaya vasanas are our inclinations, they have no strength of their own. So whatever strength they seem to have is strength that we have given them. To the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vasana, we are thereby giving it strength, so we can weaken them only by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. To the extent to which we cling to self-attentiveness, we are thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by any Vishaya vasanas. So the most effective means to weaken and eventually eradicate all Vishaya vasanas is to patiently and persistently practice being self-attentive. Therefore, self-attentiveness is not just the only means by which we can annihilate ego, but is also the most effective means to weaken its Vishaya vasanas and thereby make ourselves willing to be so keenly self-attentive that we thereby surrender ourselves entirely and dissolve forever back into our source, namely Atma Swarupa. Since Vishaya vasanas are ego's inclinations, they seem to exist only when we rise and stand as ego, namely in waking and dream. So we can weaken them only in waking and dream, and not in sleep or any other state of manolaya. This is why we cannot weaken them in Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and why Bhagavan pointed out that we therefore cannot gain any spiritual benefit whatsoever by remaining in such samadhi or any other state of manolaya, even for hundreds of years, as he illustrated by narrating the story of the yogi asking for water as soon as he woke up after being immersed for 300 years in Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Therefore, he used to warn those who were inclined to practice pranayama and other yoga techniques, but they should take care not to subside in manolaya as a result of such practices, and advised them that though they could use such practices to gain a certain degree of mental calmness, they could gain lasting benefit from such calmness only if they use it as a favorable condition to turn their attention back within to investigate who am I. This is what he implied in verses 13 and 14 of Upadesa Undiyar. In verse 13, he said, Ileamum nasam irendam odacum. That means dissolution is two, Laya and Nasa. In other words, the dissolution, meaning dissolution of the mind, is of two kinds, Laya or Nasa. So what's the difference between Laya and Nasa? That's what he then goes on to explain. In Laya 2, Ulladu Erum. What is in Laya will rise. In layer 2 actually means It's a verb. It's a verbal adverbial participle that means uh, implies being in lay or it can also be taken as lying down. In other words, subsiding, implying in layer. What is in layer will rise. Uru mind, eradu uru mindel. If its form dies, it will not rise. So the implication is layer is a temporary state. Whatever is in layer is going to rise again. Whatever, if it dies, meaning in nasa, it will not rise. So Bhagavan is pointing out here this important distinction between temporary dissolution and permanent dissolution. Temporary dissolution is called layer. Permanent dissolution is called nasa. He wrote this verse in the context of in verses 11, 12, 13, 14, he's talking about the practice, and 15, he's talking about the practice of, well, up to 14, he's talking about practice of yoga. In 15, he's talking about the conclusion of yoga. So in the context of yoga, and whenever Bhagavan talks about the practice of yoga, the main practice he talks about is the practice of pranayama, because pranayama is the key used by yogis to bring about kevala nirvikalpa samadhi. In other words, the dissolution of mind, but it's only mano layer. So that's why Bhagavan mentions it here, because what he implies is what is achieved by pranayama is not nasa, but only layer. In fact, in Nana, in the 8th paragraph of Nana, he concludes that paragraph by saying, I'm saying I'll just get it. At the end of that paragraph, he says, Ahayal, therefore, pranayama manate adaka sahayam ahume andri manonasam sayadu. That means, therefore, pranayama is just an aid to restrain the mind or to make it subside, but will not bring about manonasa. So, because pranayama will not bring about manonasa, in this context, in verse 13 of Upadesa Undiyar, he draws this distinction between laya and nasa. Laya is only temporary, nasa is permanent. What is achieved by yoga, by pranayama, is only laya. Though it's called by the name kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, it's actually just laya. That's what Bhagavan is emphasizing here. So how to avoid going into layer and instead go into nasa. That's what he talks about in verse 14 of Upadesa Undiyar. What he says in verse 14 is, Oduka valiye odungum ulate, vidakave ovari undipara, vium adonuru undipara. What that means is, only when one sends the mind, which will become calm when one restrains the breath, on the investigating path, will its form perish. That is, though the mind will become calm when one restrains the breath, it will perish only when one sends it on the orvari. Orvari can be interpreted in two ways. Or is a verb in Tamil that means to investigate or know. So orvari means means orumvari, the investigating path. In other words, the path of investigation. Or is also a form of oro, which means one. Usually, or is used before when oro is used before a vowel, it becomes or. So usually or will be used only before a vowel, but in poetry you can use or, but even before a consonant. So we can also take or vari to mean the one path. But whether we take it as the investigating path or the one path, both imply the same thing, because according to Bhagavan, the one path by which ego can be annihilated is the path of investigation. Um, so uh, so whichever way we interpret it, what he's implies by all worry is this path of self-investigation, which is the one and only means to eradicate ego and thereby achieve manonasa, annihilation of mind. Therefore, ulate or worry vidutal, sending the mind on the investigating path, or the one path, means sending the mind on the path of self-investigation. So it implies directing one's attention back towards oneself in order to see who am I. The mind cannot be sent on this path of self-investigation if it is dissolved in laya, because in laya there's no mind descend on this path. So if one practices breath restraint in order to restrain the mind, as soon as the mind becomes relatively calm, one should take care to direct it, namely the mind or attention, back towards oneself before it dissolves in laya. If we cling to self-attentive firmly enough, we will thereby avoid being swayed by our Vishaya vasanas to think of anything to think of anything other than ourselves, and we will also avoid dissolving in laya. Only if we let go of our hold on self-attentiveness can our mind either be carried away by other thoughts or be dissolved in laya. The aim of pranayama and other yoga practices is stated by Patanjali in Yoga Sutra 1, the first part of Yoga Sutra, second verse. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is nirodha. Nirodha means restraint, curbing, stopping, or prevention of chitta vrittis. Chitta vrittis means modifications, activities, or thoughts of the mind. However, if we stop all mental activity by any means other than self-investigation, atma-vichara, the resulting state will just be manolaya, which is temporary dissolution of mind, and not manonasa, permanent dissolution or annihilation of mind. So sooner or later, the mind will rise again and wander under the sway of its Vishaya vasanas, as Bhagavan points out in the 8th paragraph of Nana. I won't read the whole of this paragraph, but just the relevant sentences. That is, Bhagavan begins by saying, Manam adunguvadaku vicharane tabira vera tahunta upayangal illai. For the mind to cease, except vicharana, self-investigation, there is no other adequate means. He said very, very emphatically, there's no tahunta upayangal illai. Vera tahunta upayangal illai. There's no other adequate means. And then he goes on to say, Matra upayangal linal adanginal manam adanginal pol irandu marapadium kilambi vidum. That means if made to subside or to cease or subside by other means, the mind remaining for a while as if it had ceased will again rise up. And then he goes on to say, pranayama talum, even by pranayama, manam adangam, the mind will cease. Anal, pranan adangi irikum varial, manamum adangi irandu, pranam velipadum podu, tanum velipadum vasane vayatai alayam. That means, however, so long as the prana remains subsided, mind will also remain subsided. And when prana emerges, it, meaning the mind, will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. So that's the first few sentences of the paragraph. And the last sentence of the paragraph, is ahayal pranayamam manate adhika sahayame andri manonasam sayadu. Therefore, pranayama is just an aid to restrain the mind, um, but will not bring about manonasa. Though Bhagavan says that pranayama is an aid to restrain the mind, it is not a necessary aid. Bhagavan never said we should practice pranayama. What he taught about pranayama is only for the sake of those who are already attracted to pranayama. But it's not necessary because it can help to annihilate the mind only in the manner that he implies in verse 14 of Upadesa Undiyar, namely by calming the mind and thereby preparing it to be sent on the path of self-investigation. But no such aid is actually required because self-investigation itself is the most effective means to calm the mind. If the mind is restless or agitated, we can calm it most quickly and effectively by turning our attention back towards ourselves, thereby bypassing the need for any aid such as pranayama. Though manolaya is a state in which we remain without the least action of mind, speech, or body, it is only a temporary state from which the mind will rise again and wander under the sway of its Vishaya vasanas. Moreover, since the mind and its Vishaya vasanas are completely absent in manolaya, they are not weakened even to their slightest extent, no matter how long we may remain in manolaya. Therefore, manolaya is not the state that Bhagavan refers to in the fourth verse of Anmavidya, when he says, Solmana Tanuvins Kamadi Siridindri Suma Amandirika, when one just is resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body. It is only in the state of manonasa, but Atmajyoti, the infinite light of pure awareness, which is ourself as we actually are, will shine forth in our heart as our eternal experience, nitya anubhuti, and that we can thereby rest forever without the least action of mind, speech, or body. So what Bhagavan implies when he says, Solmana Tanuvin Kanmadi Siridindri, Summa Amandirika, Amma Ahatil Amma Jyotiye, Nitanubhutiye, when one just is, resting without the least action of mind, speech, or body, in the heart, Atma Jyoti alone will shine forth. This is Nitya Anubhuti, this is the eternal experience. Is that what we is that we should try to bring about mananasa, which we can do only by means of self-investigation, atma-vichara. Therefore, what he implies here by siridu, which means what is small, what is slight, and which in this context implies the smallest or the slightest or the least, is not that all action should cease just temporarily, but that it should cease in such a way that it never revives even to the slightest extent, as he indicated by the words anuvam viyadu, without reviving even an iota, in the second sentence of verse 1 of this song, in which he said, Poi mei a ninevu anuvam viyadu odikave, mei a Ideaveli Veyon Swayam Anma Vilangame. That means when the unreal darkness pervaded thought is dissolved without reviving even an iota in the reality pervaded heart space, oneself, the sun of pure awareness, will certainly shine by oneself. Before I continue, have any questions been asked, either in the comments here on Zoom or either in the chat in Zoom or in the comments on the live streaming on YouTube?
So there are no questions on YouTube. However, there
Hmm.
is a question that is here in the Zoom.
Okay.
Um, I shall read it out to you.
Yes.
Quote, Michael, could you please explain verse 20 of of Upadesh Tanipakal, in which Bhagavan says, if the dove caught in the hand of the hunter is let free, it will fly away even from the forest. If you ask thus, when the hunter turning back home goes away from the forest leaving the dove will remain in the forest, since even that forest which was alien will be found to be its home. Unquote.
There, Bhagavan is using an analogy. The analogy that is the wait a second. I will just get that verse so I can explain it clearly. Um, uh, Sorry, I'll just find the verse. Verse 20, I think. Is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. Oh, I don't have that here. You're saying I'll have to find it somewhere else.
In case the verse may not be with you immediately,
I can find it, I think.
Okay.
Sorry. All right. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. That is, the verse starts with a question. A question was asked by a devotee, but using an analogy. If the dove caught in the hand of a hunter is let free, it will fly away even from the forest in which it was caught, will it not? That's the implication of the question. There, the hunter is Maya, but has caught the jiva, the dove, in the web of Maya. If the dove escapes from the web of Maya, in other words, if it attains liberation, it will fly away even from the forest. That what the forest here represents the body. So what this question implies is that when we are liberated, will we not leave the body entirely? And Bhagavan's answer says, what Bhagavan implies in his answer, when the hunter turning back home, the hunt is Maya. That's when Maya, turning back home means when Maya retreats and goes away from the forest, leaving the dove, the dove, will remain in the forest, since even that forest, which was previously alien, will be found to be its home. So what this is what Bhagavan is talking about here is about the state of Jivanmukti. That is, there's some people believe, but as soon as liberation occurs, that the body should therefore die. But because the jiva is departs, and therefore the body should die. But what Bhagavan says is, when that Maya, the bondage goes, the Maya goes and returns back to where it came from, there'll be nothing other than the dove. So the, the forest which previously appeared to be alien will be found to be home. This is from a perspective of Vijnani. Even the body is I, as Bhagavan says, for example, in verse 17 of Uludunapadu. What he says in verse 17 of Uludunapadu is, wait a second, I'll just get the verse. Sorry, this is a rather subtle point Bhagavan is making here. So it requires a careful consideration. In verse 17 of Upadesa Undiyar, Bhagavan says, both for those who have known themselves and those who have not known themselves, the body is actually I. He says, the term he used in Tamil is udal nane. The body is only I, the body is actually I. But then he points out the difference. For those who do not know themselves, I is only to the extent of the body. So I is limited, in other words, I is limited to the extent of the body. For those who have known themselves within the body, oneself, I, shines without limit. So in the state of jnana, there is nothing other than I. So even if at all there's such a thing as body, even that body is I. So what Bhagavan means is, just because from the perspective of others, the jnani seems to continue living in the body, the jnani is not in any way limited by the body. Because the jnani is the infinite whole. The jnani shines without limit. Because jnana is the infinite whole. So since the body cannot be other than I, it cannot be anything other than me. That is, nothing can be other than that which is without limit, that which is infinite. The body cannot be other than I, so the body is also I. So, but as Sadhguru used to say, for the ajnani, the body alone is I. For the jnani, the body also is I. That is, there's nothing other than I for the jnani. So the forest which previously seemed to be alien, the forest being the body, will be found to be its home. In other words, it will be found to be nothing other than itself. So that's the idea behind this. It was this, Bhagavan wrote this verse in reply to a question, but he wrote it entirely in a metaphorical way. So we have to understand what the metaphor is. The dove means the jiva. The hand of the hunter is Maya. The forest is the body in which it was caught, in which the hunter caught the bird. But when the bird escapes from the hunt, when the hunter goes back, when the hunter leaves, that's when Maya departs. The dove will remain in the forest. That is, the body will continue. The body of Vijnani will continue living, because for Vijnani the body is not. The body which was previously found to be something other than itself will be found to be nothing other. I mean, it cannot be. There's nothing other. For Vijnani, there's no such thing as, nothing is alien, nothing is other than itself. Is that a clear answer to that question?
Yes, sir. I get some idea, but I have to listen to it again.
Yes. It's a little bit. It's explained in a rather. I mean, It's expressed in a rather roundabout way because it's entirely metaphorical. But
Yes.
it's just to do with the whole subject is about Jivanmukti. That is what the question is about.
Yes.
How come that is the person who asked the question, they asked it in the form of a metaphor, but their idea was, how can the jnani how can the jnani remain in the body after attaining jnana? Well, the body is for the jnani, as the body is no longer something other. That is nothing. For the jnana is the infinite whole, so there's nothing other than that.
Got it.
That is the idea.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
So are there any other questions?
No, sir. There are no further questions.
Okay. Shall I continue for a while?
Sure, we can continue for another 10 odd minutes, sir, if that is okay.
10 minutes. Okay. Okay. So to continue explaining this verse 4 of Amma Viday, we need to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we do not allow ourselves to be swayed, even to the slightest extent, by any Vishaya vasanas, because then only will we dissolve in manonasa, thereby remaining forever without the least action of mind, speech, or body. So, as I had explained, attending to anything other than ourself is a mental activity, whereas attending to ourself is not a mental activity, but a cessation of all mental activity. Because to the extent to which we attend to ourself, we as ego will thereby subside. And since ego is the doer of all mental activity, its mental activity will subside along with it. If we cease attending to anything else without attending to ourself, we will thereby subside in manolaya. Whereas if we attend to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever, we will subside forever in manonasa. Therefore, it is only to the extent to which we hold fast to being self-attentive, but we come close to being without the least action of mind, speech, or body in the sense that Bhagavan means in this verse. Whenever we allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else, we do so under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas, because everything other than ourself is a Vishaya, an object or phenomena. So Vishaya vasanas are our inclinations to attend to and experience such things. Therefore, we need to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we do not allow ourselves to be swayed, even to the slightest extent, by any Vishaya vasanas, because only then will we dissolve in manonasa, thereby remaining forever without the least action of mind, speech, or body. Since vasanas are our own volitional inclinations or likings, whenever we allow ourselves to be swayed by any vasana, we do so because we want to be swayed by it. So we can cling to self-attentiveness only to the extent to which we love to be self-attentive. Love to be self-attentive is what is called satvasana, the inclination or liking to attend only to our own being, sat, and thereby to be as we actually are. To the extent that our satvasana is strengthened, our vishaya vasanas will be weakened, and vice versa, because these two types of vasanas are opposite inclinations. Whereas vishaya vasanas are inclinations to go outwards and engage in activities, pravritti, in order to experience phenomena, vishayas, of various kinds, satvasana is the inclination to draw back within, nivritti, in order to be aware of nothing other than our own being, sat. In order to strengthen our satvasana and thereby weaken our vishaya vasanas, we need to try patiently and persistently to be self-attentive. Even if at first we're able to be self-attentive only for a few moments now and then, so long as we persevere in trying, we are moving in the right direction, because we are thereby gradually strengthening our Satvasana. No matter how strong our Vishaya Vasanas may seem to be, we can weaken and eventually eradicate all of them if we persevere in trying to be self-attentive as much as we can, as Bhagavan assures us in the 10th and 11th paragraphs of Nana. I won't read Tamil, I'll just read the English meaning of what Bhagavan says in Tamil. In the 10th paragraph, he says, even though Vishaya Vasanas, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed when Swarupa Dhyana, that is self-attentiveness, increases and increases. Without giving room even to the doubting thought, so many vasanas ceasing, is it possible to be only a Swarupa? It is necessary to cling tenaciously to Swarupa Dhyana. However great a sinner one may be, if instead of lamenting and weeping, I am a sinner, how am I going to be saved? One completely rejects the thought that one is a sinner and is zealous or steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will certainly be reformed or transformed into what one actually is. And then in the next paragraph, the 11th paragraph, he goes on to say, as long as Vishaya Vasanas exist within the mind, that is, so long as we have the least inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves, so long the investigation, who am I, is necessary. As and when thoughts appear, then and there it is necessary to annihilate them all by vicharana. Vicharana means self-investigation or keen self-attentiveness in the very place from which they arise. What's he mean by annihilating thoughts in the very place from which they arise? That is, as thoughts arise, thoughts of a sprouting of inclinations, of vasanas. So as soon as the vasana begins to sprout, without allowing it to grow into a thought, if we cling to self-attentiveness, that vasana will be destroyed in the place from which it rises, in its source. So that's what he means by it's necessary to annihilate them all by vicharana in the very place from which they arise. That implies that we need to hold on to self-attentiveness so firmly, but as and when each vasana tries to sprout in the form of a thought, because we don't allow ourselves to be distracted by it, because we're clinging to self-attentiveness, it will be destroyed in the very place from which in which it rose. And then he goes on to give a very nice definition of what is meant by vairagya or nirasa. Vairagya means freedom from raga, freedom from passion, or in other words, detachment. And nirasa means much the same, freedom from asa, freedom from desire. So vairagya and nirasa both mean desirelessness or dispassion. So what is Bhagavan, the definition Bhagavan gives of vairagya? In Tamil he says, anyate nada dirtal. That means being without attending to what is other. In other words, not attending to anything other than ourselves. That is vairagya or nirasa. Tanne vida dirital jnanam. Not leaving oneself is jnana. Vidadu can mean not leaving. It also means not letting go of. So in other words, not letting go of ourselves. In other words, not letting go of self-attentiveness, that is jnana. I mean, he goes on to say, in truth, these two, vairagya and jnana, are one. That is, not attending to anything else and not letting go of ourself are one and the same thing. Just because if we don't let go of ourselves, we are thereby not letting go, we are not attending to anything other than ourselves. But Our aim should be to not let go of ourselves, because if we merely aim to not attend to anything else, we'll end up in Manolaya. So we need to be careful. But the implication here is we need to hold on to ourselves so firmly. As Bhagavan beautifully said to Desoama, Akilandamaya, she was a uneducated village woman, but she had great love for Bhagavan, and she used to come from her village bringing, though she was very poor, she would collect food together, and she would walk the, I think it's about 50 miles from Deso to Tiruvannamalai. She would walk all that distance to come and serve Bhagavan, to cook food for him and to serve him. She had so much devotion to him. Once someone suggested to her, but it was a very auspicious day, it was a Purnima or something, and she should ask Bhagavan for some Upadesha. So she was very hesitant to do so. So she approached Bhagavan, and Bhagavan, seeing her hesitation, I may not get the details quite correct, but anyway, either she asked Bhagavan or he just saw her and he saw she wanted to ask something. And he said to her, Une vidamaliru. That literally means be without leaving yourself, or be without letting go of yourself. Many years later, when Akilandama told this to Sadhu Om, she said, I still don't fully understand what Bhagavan meant by that, but those words have been with me ever since then. When Bhagavan uttered those words, it was just like nectar. And those words are always with me. So even if I don't understand them, I just, these words have never leave me. So Bhagavan's words have such a power. So though she may not have fully understood what Bhagavan meant, those words will have their own power. And those words that Bhagavan said to that simple, uneducated village woman, this is in those 3 words, he summarizes the whole of his teachings. Unne vidamaliru, be without leaving yourself. And that's what he implies here when he says, not leaving oneself is jnana. So holding on to ourselves without ever letting go of ourselves, that is the path that Bhagavan has taught us. And that is Atma Vichara, that is Atma Samapanam. That is self-investigation and self-surrender. So he says, in truth, these two, not letting go of oneself and not attending to anything else, are one. And then he goes on to say, just as pearl divers tying stones to their waists and sinking pick up pearls that are found at the bottom of the ocean, so each one, sinking deep within oneself with vairagya, may attain Atma Muttu. Atma Muttu means the self-pearl. That means the pearl that is our own real nature. So in this analogy, the stones that the pearl divers tied to their waist is analogous to vairagya. So in order to sink deep within, we need to have intense vairagya. That means we need to be free from any inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. In other words, we must have so much love to attend to ourselves alone. And with that, we must sink deep within ourselves and thereby attain the pearl that is our own real nature. And then in the next sentence, he gives us a great assurance. He says, I'll read the Tamil for this because it's such an important sentence. Oruvan tan sarupate adeyam varayal nirantara surupa smaranaye tai patruvanayin adu andre podom. That means if one clings fast to uninterrupted swarupa smarana. Swarupa smarana means self-remembrance or remembrance of our own real nature. In other words, remembrance of I, until one attains swarupa, until one attains one's own real nature, adu andre podam, that alone is sufficient. And then he gives the final 2 sentences. he only gives an analogy. We have to understand what that analogy means. What he says is, so long as there are enemies within the fortress, they will be continuously coming out from it. If one is continuously cutting down or destroying all of them as and when they come, the fortress will be captured. So what does he mean by that? The enemies within the fortress are the Vishaya Vasanas. The fortress in which they're hiding is our own heart. If so long as they're in, if you if an enemy is surrounding a fortress, has besieged a fortress, but the if an army has surrounded a fortress, the enemies in the fortress, so long as they have food and water in the fortress, they will not come out. They'll stay in the fortress because it's safe. But if there's no food or water in the fortress, they have to come out in search of food or water. For the vasanas, though they live in the heart, there's no nourishment for them in the heart. In order for the Vishaya Vasanas to be nourished, they need to come out. They need to take our attention away from ourselves to feed on the Vishayas. So the enemies in the fortress of the Vishaya Vasanas, which are constantly trying to take our attention away from ourselves. But if instead of allowing our attention to be distracted away from ourselves, if we hold firmly to self-attentiveness or Swarupa Smarana, that is in effect cutting down the enemy one by one as they come out. And eventually the fortress will be captured. That means we'll gain possession of our heart again. We'll vanquish all the vasanas and we will remain, and we will thereby capture our heart. In other words, we'll remain as we actually are. So that's what Bhagavan says in those two paragraphs. Therefore, though it may seem to us that it is not possible to be so keenly self-attentive that we thereby remain peacefully as we actually are without the least action of mind, speech, or body, if we persevere tenaciously in trying to be self-attentive as much as possible, we will thereby eventually strengthen our Sattvasana and weaken our Vishaya Vasanas to such an extent that we are able to be so keenly self-attentive that we cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever, and thereby dissolve forever back into our own real nature, Swarupa, which is Satchit, our fundamental awareness of our own being, I am. This is the state of permanent dissolution in our source, I am. This state of permanent dissolution in our source, I am, alone is liberation, mukti or moksha, eradication of ego, annihilation of mind, manonasa, and destruction of all vasanas, vasanakshaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Sorry, I continued a little beyond the 10 minutes you said. I hope it's not too long.
Not a problem at all, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for your wonderful guidance today. And there is just one question on YouTube, if you might like to take it.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. So we have one question from Marian Rose. Quote, Hi, Michael. Do you think Bhagwan thought that Paramhans Yoganand's Kriya Yoga would lead to liberation? Thank you. Unquote.
I don't know anything about Kriya Yoga, but Bhagavan is very, very clear. The only direct means to liberation is Atma Vichara. That is, whatever other path we may follow, sooner or later, we need to come to the path of Atma Vichara. Atma Vichara is like the river that discharges in the ocean. All other paths are like tributaries of that river. The water in the tributaries cannot reach the ocean directly. The water in the tributaries have to flow into the main river in order to be discharged into the ocean, which is the ultimate aim. So other paths have have a role to play in our spiritual journey. But once we come to this main path, Bhagavan's path of Atma-vichara, we can leave aside all other practices. That is, other practices are useful to the extent to which they lead us to this path. Because what is our goal? Our goal is knowing and being what we actually are. In order to know and be what we actually are, we need to annihilate ego, because ego is a false awareness of ourself. So knowing and being what we actually are and annihilation of ego actually are one and the same thing. In order to know what we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. How can we know ourselves if we never attend to ourselves? If we're always attending to things other than ourselves, we can't expect thereby to know ourselves. All spiritual practices, other than Atma-vichara, entail attending to something other than ourselves. In order to know ourselves, we need to attend to ourselves alone. So other paths may be useful means. They may help to purify the mind. They may give concentration, or ultimately other paths are useful to the extent to which they prepare us and give us the willingness to turn within to know what we actually are. So whatever other path it may be, as I say, I don't know what is this, exactly what Yogananda meant by Kriya Yoga, but whatever it is, it can at best be a means to lead us to this path. How it leads us to this path, I don't know, because I don't know enough about it, but it is useful only to the extent to which, only if and to the extent to which it leads us to this path. Bhagavan is very, very, in so many places, Bhagavan has clearly emphasized this path alone is the only means to, because how can we know ourselves if we never attend to ourselves? So whatever other path we may follow, sooner or later, we need to turn our attention within to see who am I, because that is the ultimate aim of all spiritual practices. I hope that is an adequate answer to that question.
So the response from Marian on YouTube is, and I quote, "Much gratitude and thanks for answering my question, Michael, and for making this satsang available on YouTube," unquote.
Right. Well, it's all I'm doing. I'm just pointing out what Bhagavan said. So it's all thanks due only to Bhagavan, because all that is, what do I know? All I know is what I've learned from Bhagavan and learned from, by his grace, being attracted to this path and trying my best to follow this path. So he is the source of all clarity.
Thank you very much, Michael. We shall
Right.
reconvene next month, second Sunday. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Om Namo
Namo
Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
I shall now request Mr. N.G. Krishnan at the Shrine of Raman Kendra, Delhi, to conclude with Akshar Manamalai and Arti.
We are now going to recite Arunachala Aksharamanamali. Karunarunamani Kiranavali Nigar Tarumaksharamanamagal Male Tirunal Nadiya Tiruvadiyar Tirumaral Tiliya Parabudal Purulaga Karunagaramuni Ramanariyan Uvagayinal Suliyad Gadiyaga Arunachalamena Agame Arivurum Arvar Shivanulagarvari Arunachalavarakketra Aksharamanamalishaatra Karunagaraganavadiye Karamarvikkapaye Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலமென அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறறுப்பாய் அருணாச்சல அழகு சுந்தரம் போல் அகமும் நீயும் முற்று அபின்னமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அகம்புகுண்டீத்துன் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சல ஆருக்காயனி ஆண்டனை அகற்றில் அகிலம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல இப்படி தப்புனை ஏன் நினைப்பித்தாய் இனி யார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சல ஈன்றிடம் அன்னையின் பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் உனதருள் அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுலத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பாய் அருணாச்சல ஊசுட்டுளம்பிடார் உனை கண்டடங்கிட உன்னழகை காட்டருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல என்னை அழித்திப்போர் என்னை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சல ஏனிந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல ஐம்புலக் கொள்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போர் அகத்தினில் இளையோ அருணாச்சல ஒருவனம் உன்னை ஒளித்தவர் வருவார் உன் சூதே இது அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல ஓங்காரப் பொருள் ஒப்புயர்வில்லோய் உனையாரறிவார் அருணாச்சல ஓவை போல் எனக்குன் அருணை தந்தனை ஆளுவதும் கடல் அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ 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 शिव अरुणाचला அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அச்சரமணமாலை வாழி.
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's Sunday Satsang.
पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् वशुमान् भवति इन्द्रमा वां पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् वशुमान् भवति एवं वेद रूपामायतनं वेद आयतनवान् भवति तानि गानि भावानि जन्मान्तरकृतानि च तानि गानि नश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणपदे पदे प्रकृष्टपापनाशाय प्रकृष्टवसुधये प्रदक्षिणं करोमीश सुरेश्वर कर्मणा न प्रजया जनेन त्यागे दीपे अमृतत्वमानुषो पदे नदाहं निगिदं गुहायां विभ्राजदेशद्यो विशन्ति वेदान्तविज्ञानसुनिश्चितार्था सन्न्यासयोगाद्यतशुद्धसत्त्वाः हे ब्रह्मलोके परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे चक्रं विभागं परमेश्वभूतं यत्पुण्डरीकं प्रमद्धगस्तं तत्राविचक्रं गहनं विशोग तस्मिन् यदन्तस्तदुपासितव्यं यो वेदादोषरप्रोक्तो वेदौन्तेजप्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य यत्परस्य महेश्वरः वेदोक्तमन्त्रपुष्पाञ्जलिं समर्पयामि निराशनं नास्ति तमेव शरणं मम तस्मात् कारुण्यभावेन रक्षरक्षमेश्वर रक्षरक्षमहाप्रभो अयेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्य आत्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यद्यत् अखिलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि यदक्षरपदपृष्ठं मात्राहीनं तु यद्भवेत् तत्सर्वं क्षम्यतां देव नारायण नमोऽस्तुते विसर्गबिन्दुमात्राणि पदबाधाक्षराणि च न्यूनानि चातिरिक्तानि समस्तपुरुषोत्तमा समस्तयजनन्दना अभ्यप्रिवादितां मायेन मार्गेण महमदीशा ब्राह्मणेभ्यः सुखिनः लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु त्वं कृष्णार्पणमस्तु कृष्ण 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 त्वं कृष्णार्पणमस्तु
It seems there might have been some connection issue at the Kendra. This brings us to the closure of today's Sunday Satsang at Raman Kendra Delhi with Mr. Michael James. We shall meet Mr. James again for Anma Viday next month, second Sunday. Namo Ramana, and may Bhagwan bless all of us. Thank you.